In the spring of 2006, a doctor wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times. He observed, "There has been a shift in attitude within the profession. I see examples of it every day. I was making rounds in my intensive care unit recently when one of the interns presented a case. 'This is the first admission for this 55-year-old male,' he said. 'Stop,' I said. 'He is a man.' 'That's what I said,' the intern replied. 'Not exactly,' I answered. Clearly, the intern didn't get it. Neither do a lot of other healthcare professionals anymore. So here are some observations from this 50-year-old man, who so far has always been made to feel like a human being, and not a metric or a unit to be processed or a case study. I've spent a lot of time at Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital in Boston. Amazing people work there and are treated there. When you're first diagnosed with mild traumatic brain injury, your first thought is, what do you mean mild? It's devastated me and turned my family upside down. Mild compared to what? When you walk into Spaulding, you see compared to what? I'll tell you about some of my meetings with Rick Sanders, a senior speech-language pathologist at Spaulding. I rode the 50-minute train to Boston for my first appointment with Rick, and I got there early. The train's last stop is North Station, about a 5-minute walk to Spaulding. As I sat in the cafeteria, writing in my journal, trying to remember what I'd done the day before, my ears were ringing louder than usual. I thought, this could actually start driving me crazy. We need survival tactics with this injury because we're stuck in our heads as surely and as claustrophobically as when we were in the MRI. I decided then and there that the ringing would be my constant reminder that the Lord's hand was on me, and that's helped a lot. When I walked into Rick's office that first time, everything came crashing down on me. He stood there smiling and welcomed me, and before I even sat down, I choked up with tears. It hit me how serious this whole thing was, and I thought I needed to explain myself. I guess it's because being here makes it so, and I couldn't think of the best word. Real, he asked? Yeah, real. Rick has been my right-hand man throughout my rehab. I used to call it my recovery and rehab, but the past year or so I really don't know if I can quantify actual recovery in any significant way. Anyway, Rick has been working with people like me and people a lot worse off than me for 25 years. He also has a degree from Harvard Divinity School across the Charles River in Cambridge, and so our conversations can get pretty wide-ranging. He's the salt of the earth. Once after we'd worked together a little, I walked into his office and he stood there smiling at me. He looked me right in the eye and asked, "How are you?" I groaned because I knew that he knew that was the question I had problems answering. He kept smiling and asked, rather perversely I thought, "Well, how are you?" I tried to answer as best I could, like a kid learning how to swim in the deep end. What Rick made clear to me was that his office would be a low-risk environment to try things. In our sessions, he sometimes puts me on the spot, the same spot as in real life, and have me practice what I would say when somebody asked me that kind of open-ended question. Rick has become part cognitive therapist and part personal trainer. I decided after a few months not to dress for comfort in my sessions at Spaulding, jeans and sweatshirt, but to dress more professionally, like I've got a job to do. I started dressing like I was going to work, which of course I am. My job now is to get better. Using metaphors to describe what is hard to describe to people really helps. My antennae are always up for new ways of describing various aspects of this injury. In his book, Watermark, Joseph Brodsky says the fog in Venice can be so thick that if you go out on an errand, you can find your way back via the tunnel your body has burrowed in the fog. The tunnel is likely to stay open for half an hour. Memory is like that fog. You feel rushed to remember something because the fog is closing around the word or thought you're trying to see and express, and that time pressure adds to the stammering.
If you're on the south side of town, go north. Stay away from the fog.
I've been asked what cognitive strain is like. It's like having the microwave and toaster on at the same time, at least in our house. A short circuit and shut down. And Rick Sanders has taught me some great metaphors. He calls that place in our brains that stores short-term memories our clipboard. Say you're adding 12 plus 32, and then you have to add 9 to it. You have to hold on to 44 before you can add the 9. You have to put 44 onto your clipboard. Well, brain-injured people have smaller clipboards now. We can't hold on to and retrieve information as easily as we could before the injury, even something as simple as a series of numbers or 4 random words. Rick compares memory to Velcro, because brain injuries can make our memories slippery with no little hooks for them to latch onto. One very early session, Rick was telling me something useful, so I reached into my pocket and found a scrap of paper. When I started writing on it, he asked where my notebook was. I told him I left it at home because I didn't think I'd need it because I thought we'd be doing testing. He said, "Your notebook is a prosthesis for your brain. You'll find you should always carry it with you." I don't know about you, but the word prosthesis always makes me think of The Fugitive.
I came home, there was a man in my house. He had an artificial arm.
I learned names for things I experienced, which validated them for me because if there was a name for it, it must not just be happening to me. Flooding was that kind of word. When I would bump up against something beyond me, like instructions, or trying to explain something, my mind would feel jammed. And because I was watching that happen to me, I tended to get choked up. How sad, I would think. And then that line from Pink Floyd's Comfortably Numb. For example, try taking 1 minute and calling out as many words as you can think of that begin with the letter A. You can probably come up with a lot more than I could come up with. I came up with 4, which was disturbing to me as a writer. Rick called this flooding. He said that when a town floods, traffic can't get through the intersections. Our minds are like that. Between the excruciating challenge of racking your brain, trying to think of words, and observing yourself on the verge of defeat, and emotions on the brink of falling apart, no wonder we flood. Speech-language therapy is not like psychotherapy, where it's a good thing to touch on emotion because you're unearthing something critical. When I flooded with Rick, he made it clear that I needed to manage the flooding so I could function and perform the job at hand. So even today, when I'm trying something hard, I take a deep breath and say to myself, I have work to do, I can't flood. But you have to weigh not flooding with the dangers of pressing on when you should be resting. There's a big difference. Rick's practical advice like that has been invaluable. I've learned that the brain is not like a muscle that builds more muscle after being torn down. If you overwork your brain with a brain injury and feel that awful cognitive strain, you need to stop. Continuing to exert your brain in that state is not at all like exercising a muscle, so don't be stubborn. The brain doesn't work that way. If you keep going, thinking you're being strong and persistent and brave, you can actually hinder the healing process. You can actually set back your recovery. This term, cognitive fatigue, is used a lot with brain injuries, and while it's helpful in its own way, I hate using the word fatigue. To me, it connotes simple tiredness, and people can be unforgiving or clueless about the kind of fatigue the brain experiences. If a soldier in boot camp tells his drill sergeant he can't go on, or he really shouldn't go on because he's feeling fatigued, he'd get ridiculed.
Do you feel dizzy? Do you feel faint?
So the only way I use the word is when I liken it to the way a paper clip gets fatigued when you bend it back and forth. Before too long, it snaps, and before too long, an injured brain will just shut down.